Hello. Um, I quit Superhuman this past weekend, and I felt strongly enough to make a video about it. So here's what that video is. Um, yeah, I don't know, man. I just feel like this is such an inflection point for me, where it's like the past 3 years, I paid $10 a month to use, email, which for a majority of folks is like arguably free in Gmail. So I went from being a Superhuman power user to now just using stock native Gmail. And yeah, I thought this was a cool kind of like learning process, and I thought I would just document my thoughts in a quick video. So just to set the context straight here, and this is just like a sidebar to make sure I have a coherent stream of thoughts instead of just like rambling. Just to set the context here, Superhuman, I don't know if they still do this, but it was a piece of software that you would have to sit on a wait list for. And when you got to the top of the wait list, you would meet with one of their customer service representatives to get onboarded into the software. And for Superhuman, what this looked like was, you on, I think, if I'm remembering correctly, you would on the call, like a Zoom call with one of the customer service folks, you would, share your Gmail credentials, or you would kind of like pair it in Superhuman, which was like extremely brave because like they relied on the software. And I think that was the real kind of just like wow moment of the software being so sick and they could do a live demo with no flaws. Um, and during that customer service call, you would basically, if I think I was like every other person who is so bad at email, where it's like you have an inbox that is like 17,000 unread emails from 4 or 5 years ago. And you would go down to inbox zero. They would work with you, just like white glove to make your inbox go from 17,000 to zero. um, and admittedly at the time it was like so sweet. And just like you were taught the fundamentals of like how to use email. But and that in itself was enough to keep me for 3 years paying $10 a month for the software. But I think also it was part of that reason that kind of part of the software that made me churn, right? So just with that foundation aside, I think just like going through the list, I think what was really fundamentally cool about the kind of like Superhuman experience was that I feel like they created an email power user in me, right? Like I think there's an argument here that I put where it's like I don't think email is something that people are ever really taught. Where it's like you just get better by process of osmosis, and you just get folks. There's like a sort of like learning process where it's like you have to fall off the bike to kind of like learn. And people who are just like innately better at you than email because they're just like older to you, they've sent 1,000 times more email that you've sent. Send you a good email, and you're like, wow, I want to take some of the good parts of their email and make that my email cadence. So it was kind of like a cool kind of like ownership moment of like Superhuman kind of teaching me how to use email, and showing me that email does not have to be 17,000 unread emails. So in that sense, I thought that was like really cool. But I also think they sort of in leveling up the bar for me and like teaching me how to actually use email, there's also a lot more. They also showed me how email should be done, but also with the nuances and with the way that I have like preference, they also taught me how email should not be done, right? In the sense that I think there's also just like timely. But whenever I visited Gmail, the Gmail native, I kind of got a peek behind the scenes at how Superhuman worked, right? Like um I think the best example is probably if I pop open here. If I pop open here, the that kind of wow moment of turning my 17,000 inbox into an inbox of zero was really, you know, I'm looking at this in retrospective, and I don't know if the word is like they're cheating versus like kind of just like selling me on a pipe dream. Because if you pop open this sort of this label of deleted messages, you would think this is a Gmail kind of like um this came with Gmail, but this actually was a Superhuman label. Like the way that they sort of like showed you how to do email and like showed you how email could be was just by lumping every email that was currently in your inbox, and like, as I said, it was just like emails from 2017, etc., into this label, deleted messages, and they would essentially just show you how your inbox could look if it was clean, right? But that was enough to wow me, to sell me on the software. And you would never, it was always out of sight, out of mind, but never really out of your Gmail, because it was just under that label and hidden, right? So anyway, like, these sort of foundations of just like poking around more in like the Gmail native, and like seeing in retrospective how they did the like onboarding, because it was really just like, Superhuman was like a wrapper for like Gmail. Um, really kind of just like taught me that, wow, I'm really paying $10 a month for nothing, right? So, sorry, I quit Gmail, but like there's more and more kind of examples of this where it's like, I had to pop into Gmail to, because I think I was getting like some emails that was always filtered into trash, and I would have to look for them in the trash because I knew innately that it was Superhuman putting them in the trash. But no matter how much I taught it that this should not be trash, it was always in trash. I had to just like go into Gmail and like wrench my way out, where it's like, I knew how they did it, right? They set a filter where it's like, if you got this email, put this in the, or if you got an email from this address, send it in the trash. And I just don't think they built the sort of like teaching or like the delete flow of that, where it's like in app, I was telling it to stop doing this behavior, but in Gmail, it was not doing that. So I had to physically go in Gmail, and then, it realized, I hit that moment of realization where it's like, oh, wow, this is really not as impressive as I thought it was. And then, this other final example that I'm just going to get into is just like, um, I think Gmail recently pushed a product thing where it was like, if you don't know the sender, you cannot accept the Gmail or the calendar invite in app. Um, and that really, really stunted Superhuman, because, after that change, whenever you wanted to accept a Google Calendar invite in Superhuman, you couldn't, because when you pressed yes, you were, popped open into like a Gmail um, invite with the same email, and you had to confirm that you knew the sender in Gmail. And ultimately, what you would end up doing is just like confirming it in Gmail and then just like closing it out in Superhuman. But this kind of like just like really, really awkward flows that made it really, really awkward for me to continue using Superhuman, all culminated me, ultimately churning um, after my month of realization. So I really think there's like, and as probably you can see before I popped up in the deleted message, like my inbox in Gmail is still pretty good. So I think what innately happened was like Superhuman sort of like leveled up my baseline of how email should be done, and then eventually I saw like how the sausage was made enough to quit with the new knowledge that they gave me, um because they weren't doing like anything more, right? So, and anyway, this is like a really, really long preface into like what email was, but I think this kind of like dichotomy is enough to kind of like make an argument where I'm like, pushing here of wrappers or like design being enough to create wedges but never moats. And I think that's especially true for power users, whether or not you create them, right? um and I think, yeah, the I'm gonna argue both sides here, where it's like design is enough to create a wedge but never a moat. So design obviously is enough to create a wedge, right? I don't think you have to go far and wide to kind of you know find a Reddit comment or like find some person word of mouth saying that like, oh, there was these two options, but I chose this piece of software, or just like generally I chose this thing because it looked better or it felt better in my hands. I did not have as many constraints using it, right? I think there's an example here of like TurboTax by Intuit and like Free Tax USA, things like Mint and like you need a budget, Reddit readers, or like different kinds of like Reddit wrappers. Whichever one looks better, like whichever one has dark mode, generally is able to pull over some users who are more specific about those things. And like things like, I think this is also kind of like a tangential argument, but like the early days of like Apple versus Samsung, where it's like, oh, if you text someone a green kind of like SMS that shows that they have a Samsung instead of an Apple, and like you're texting the kind of like word of mouth conversation where you're texting someone who didn't have money or someone who's broke. And then like Mac Windows propaganda of like Mac looking better than Windows and inherently kind of like attracting more folks because it was more simplistic, or like, the UI UX is better. Just I think these are kind of just like easy, just really low hanging fruit arguments that design is enough to create a wedge, where it's like it's enough to kind of like onboard people to choose you over the next best product, right? Because it just looks better and people want that like simplicity, right? But I never think, in this superhuman example, that it can ever be a moat where it's like something just looks better. But if everything's consistent and something just looks better, I don't think that ever keeps people in the software just because it looks better. And there's going to be days where, let's say in the same example, like Samsung has better features, or like Google Pixel has better features, and things are kind of neck and neck. I don't think that that's design is enough to keep for someone from transferring from like Apple to Samsung, or like Mac to Windows, right? Um and I think a lot of this is really happening in the companies that I mentioned, so I think it's like very, very timely and ironic, right? um and I think this is just compounding on this, is like, especially being the case for power users, where it's like, I think there's enough of an argument here to warrant that if it's great, or if it really kind of just like focuses or tailors to like how people actually do things. um I think almost like, I hate to like think about it in this framework, but I almost think there's like a 2 by 2 matrix of like, if it looks great and feels great, that's the like ideal, that's like the best place to be. But if it like looks bad and still works great, I think people will choose that, power users will choose that, instead of like choosing one that's designed but has less features, because those are how power users kind of like function, right? So yeah, I think a lot of this can kind of like also really just apply to like Apple, Samsung, Mac, Windows. Like, just speaking from me internally too, like, I also coincidentally swapped over from like a Mac to my main PC that I built. And I think just one thing that I've been like really, really loving that like Apple doesn't do well is sort of this like personalized insights tab, where like I think Apple does have, the command center or the notification center. And that, also kind of like is cool, but it doesn't feel as good as how this presents itself to me, where I can kind of like choose the stuff I choose, and there's like this Microsoft gaming integration that I was kind of like, I really like, and it teaches me where's like my location, and it tells me what clothing to wear, whereas like you should wear a jacket if it's raining or whatever. So again, these are just like all microcosms of the same example of like design kind of being able to take you, or like being able to convince you, but not being able to keep you, because as someone who is a power user, or like admittedly thinks a certain way of just like, if it works better, it works better. um I don't think design can ever be like a mode, right? So I think this kind of like this towards the end of the video, but like I think tangentially, I was curious of like what Superhuman could have done. I think that's like an interesting thing to talk about. And I still don't know how I feel about this, which is why I kind of like preface it with like tidbit. And I had to paint Superhuman in a certain way, but like it seems like for the past 2 years, or what from what I can remember, I am, and again, this is why I'm like kind of like trying to mince my words, but I am a little bit curious why I didn't churn sooner. Because I don't think Superhuman has done really anything like magical for the past 2 years. And, during COVID, especially when you're kind of like all inside, maybe that's not a good kind of like argument. But like, when you make claims about your software like Superhuman did, where it was like, this is like video game like, and, I think something that Rahul, their CEO, did was kind of like push forward this idea of like the product market fit kind of like canvas, and people were just like, point is, people were just like hailing Superhuman as like great product. When you make the claims of sentiment that Superhuman did, and don't do anything fundamentally awesome to your product while doing everything on the side, I think there's a tension there that's just like so weird. um and you just have to back it up, right? You have to back what you say of being a really, really good product, with good product, right? And I think this is like really, really interesting, because I'm going to pop over to this file. This is Magic. It was a project that Bonnie and I worked on, and we got some traction here, but we just both didn't end up chasing it because we're busy with other things. But we got up to this like landing page. We got far enough ahead that we had to make a landing page, and we got folks who were like truly, truly interested, who wanted to send us money immediately for us to build the software. But it's kind of like sad that we didn't chase it. But anyway, like, I think what Superhuman could have done, and I think it's just like, this illustrates how easy sort of like, you know easy, right? Like how easy features are to think about for like what you could do for like email power users that you create, because it's just there, right? So I think that just like compounds on the fact that I'm so curious why Superhuman has not done any of this, or like built a new feature, because they've had so many paying customers for so long, right? So this is just like really all kind of like only design or only kind of like theory, but this was enough to convince people to stop using Gmail, or like in some cases of folks we interviewed, move over from Superhuman into our stuff. And these are all again theoretical, right? But like automatic categorization of emails, which I think email or Superhuman kind of has, but like there's like this kind of like functionality of like teaching the your personal assistant who is like sorting your email of like how email should work. So inbox, newsletter, spam were like the three that we did, and then like suggested actions, right? I thought this was like so cool of like, for example, like the idea behind this was like if you did not open up an email from a address multiple times in a row, the suggested to do would be like unsubscribe, right? Hey, you're not reading this newsletter, why don't you unsubscribe for now, right? Or like to do awaiting response. Whereas like if something was opened or not, like we would guess that you would need to respond to this, and you know we would suggest that as the action at the top, where it's like, hey, you should respond to this, or you should unsubscribe to this. And then like other things that just made people excited, like email inspo, or like email inspiration, or you could pop open this tab, and the idea was that we could source good emails from the community, where it's like, here's a cold email that I wrote to this person that got kind of like an email, or here's a thing that I wrote and it was like awesome, or like here's how I end my emails, here's how I do kind of like warm intros. um I think that's just like low hanging fruit in email, because that's how people should use it, right? And then this, even lots of this was just like, again, theoretical and like really no design, more so than just like hinting and like wink wink nudge nudge, kind of like add a feature. But like summarizing, where it's like, what if we could summarize your email in email, and you could kind of like read it really really quickly instead of like spending so much time. Or like kind of like auto labeling inbound threats of like, here's a phishing match, or like here's spam, just like doing that better. And then also suggesting the action of like, mark spam, right? And I think this is just like all kind of just like all set up to this argument that I think if you're an email client that produces, or that shapes itself to be perceived as producing great product, you have to produce great product. Like there's no excuse for your features not to be awesome. And for a power user like me, who would continue to pay Superhuman for months on months on months on end, to quit, because it doesn't feel like I'm paying for what I'm getting. Like I'm just getting a wrapper, and like sort of like sent with Superhuman in the signature, as well as just kind of like a pixel tracker, where it sends people if it shows me if someone like read my email. But in more cases than not, that gave me more anxiety of just like, oh, this person read my email but it didn't respond to me, or like how many times has the person read my email, right? So in any case, I don't think there's really any excuse, or like I think I'm really the worst case, or worst outcome possible of like customer churning, even though I should be a happy customer, right? So, and then finally, I think it's just like, this is again all just visceral arguments. It's like things that I'm thinking about top of mind. I wrote this like note in like 5 minutes, but I think right now that the really only moat for like prosumer, like pro consumer software, or like just, I don't know if this applies to software in general, but it's just like software that really really needs to be excellent. I really think the only moat here is technology, right? Like the only moat here is to kind of just like change, or like think from first principles of like how people really would want to use a piece of software, and like just like innovate on the antiquated things that exist, right? Like email. And I think there's like two really great examples that come to mind. Sideline by Tommy Searle. Essentially, it's just like a Reddit wrapper for sports fans, right? So Tommy identified that like Reddit, or like sports fans, would have multiple Reddit tabs open in the background, because they want during the remote era, or like if they can't get tickets to a game, they would still want that ambiance, that feeling of being able to chirp and like talk trash with like the fellow community, as well as like the opposing team's community. So they would have lots of these Reddit tabs open, and like type comments, and like participate in the like long stream of like live game discussion threads. um so much so that he built an app and people really really loved it. It was just like a Reddit wrapper, and all it did was like stream, subreddit kind of like threads into an app, and people loved it so much that they used it, right? And then the other example here is like Transit, and I think Transit is, if I'm not mistaken, like a bootstrapped, or they raised a small round. They're also an iOS app, or I don't know if it's just iOS, but they're a mobile phone app, and what they do is help you do transit better. And they do this by building a user base of transit users, and kind of just like putting, or like fighting Google Maps on power user features, right? Where it's like people use Google Maps for kind of like transit information, but transit does it one better. Where if you're on the bus, there's an activity in transit, right? If you're also on the bus or on the train, you have a survey where it's like, oh, is this bus really, really full, or is this bus really, really not full? And you kind of can answer that. And transit, streams your information, or your kind of like, live location information in real time to tell other users if a bus is running late. And that's something that Google Maps or like Apple Maps doesn't do, as far as I'm aware. And that's why I really, really love, or like there's a really kind of like big population of folks who swear by Transit as their main, commuting app, right? Because even though like Apple Maps and Google Maps are probably more well known, Transit is better for folks who are, quite reliant on transit, or like the transit service, and hence they use it better, right? So anyway, the final thing that I just want to like make, because this video is like getting super super long, is that I think you know design can be a wedge in, but I feel like you know I don't know, or like I don't know, again, this is like visceral, so I don't really care the repercussions, but like I feel like it creates more of a tough parallel paradox than anything really good, right? Because though you can kind of like use design as a wedge, this argument that is just like, I think, startups, or like, new software companies no longer stay lean, because now not only do they have to like ship excellent power user features that kind of like differentiate them from the Google Maps, the Reddits, the Gmails of the world, they have to ship powerful features that look awesome, because design is their wedge, right? So now there's no less stress of like you having to have designers on hand who are fundamentally just really really good and understand both sides of the space, because that's the foundation that your software has set, right? So I guess I don't know how much I'm really recommending against design as a wedge, but I feel like if you're going to, there's just like a lot of nuance here, right? If you're going to be a good design company, you have to be a good design company all the way through. If you're going to be a good, product company, you have to be a good product company all the way through. And I'm just really kind of more and more kind of, rethinking how much effort, or like how much ROI we give design, because of the pitfalls that I've outlined, right? Um, yeah, anyway, this was a long video, but fun to make. These are my thoughts on why I quit Superhuman, and I'm excited to see how many of my takes kind of like stay true, and are not more visceral, more so than me giving them more thought. Anyway, this is cool to make, really, really shoddy, but I hope you enjoyed.